Greetings and welcome. My name is Jake Rayson. I'm a wildlife food forest garden designer, and this is the Beginner's Forest Garden Workshop. I'm a bit early, so I will start precisely at 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. That's Cardiff time, that's London time, in about 10 seconds. And then we'll get started. I'll start again. Okay. Right then. So greetings and welcome. My name is Jake Rayson. I am a wildlife food forest garden designer, and this is the Beginners Forest Garden Workshop live streaming 15 minutes of what a forest garden is and how to get cracking. And then there's a 40-minute Zoom meeting afterwards. You should have a link if you've signed up and booked a Zoom tickets on Gumroad. Just a quick note, this is going to be the last of the workshops because I don't think there's not enough of an interest, and it's an awful lot of work to do the publicity for it. So I'll be doing ad hoc workshops as and when. There'll be beginners workshops in some shape or form, but not on a regular monthly basis. Now, if you press P, the slideshow is always available at natureworks.org.uk/realtime, and that's where the slides live. And if you press the P key on your keyboard, you get the notes, and the notes come up, and then you can see the slideshow. Yeah. So press the P key. There's extra notes in there. Just get moving then. There's a lot to cover. So first of all, I'll look at the definition of what a forest garden is, and then the stages. There's three. I like to break it down into 3 stages of creating a forest garden. There's planning, structure, and then cultivate. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the reference material. So just like further links for further reading, because this is just a very, very quick and swift introduction. Oh, I'll just check if there's any messages. You can message me. I might not get to. If you message me on YouTube or Twitch, I'll get to them at the end. Hello, everybody. Oh yes. So, why a forest garden? Now, this is the million-dollar question. There is an ecological and climate emergency. We do not have time to argue about this. The scientific evidence is absolutely irrefutable. Anyone who argues against it is a numpty and has a vested interest in oil or something. So 3.5 degrees Celsius by 2050, which is only 28 years away. So we need to do something fast. And this is my reason for getting involved in a forest gardening. Is it something practical that you can do that has an effect, an impact on more than your immediate circumstances, and affects your local environment, and it also goes out as an approach to the broader landscape, to the wider landscape. And there's lots of positive. If you don't want to look at it from a selfish point of view, there's lots of positives. It's very good for your well-being. Being outside and gardening, any kind of gardening, is very good for your well-being. And what is I personally find particularly attractive about it is that if you're gardening for wildlife, so which is what you're doing when you're creating a forest garden, you're working with nature. If you garden for wildlife, then it makes you feel better because you know what you're doing is having a positive effect on your environment and on the wildlife about you. It's productive, so a forest garden, you can eat the eat the produce from your garden. It's not just for show or just for wildlife. You can also eat it, so it can be everything. And it's good for your health. It's good for your mental health, and it's good for your physical health. So what on earth is a forest garden? Well, this is a little sentence. I'm very glad you asked that question. This is a sentence that I put together. A productive garden that emulates the edge of woodland, and it works with natural processes. Yep, so peat-free compost, no plastic, well, minimum amount of plastic. There's not like 0 plastic. No fertilizers, no external. Don't generally not once it's established. You're not bringing in any extra fertilizers. No pesticides, no herbicides. You're using your balanced ecosystem to achieve that. So you're working with natural processes. This is a still from Thomas Rignow's short film of Martin Crawford's Forest Garden for the National Geographic. Really, really good. I'd recommend it. There's a link here in the notes. So press the P key, you get the link in the notes. Another way of defining it is growing edible crops in a wildlife garden. So I think that's beautiful. Martin Crawford's garden is very, very beautiful. So characteristics. A forest garden is sustainable, it's productive, and it's wildlife friendly. Those for me are the three key things. It's sustainable in that you can keep on gardening with very, very few inputs, if any at all. It has IPC, which is integrated pest control. Basically, you grow crops, insects eat it, and then the predators of those insects, which are insects or birds or what have you, will come and eat those insects, and you have a balanced ecosystem, and then you don't have problems with mass infestations. The system is in balance. Same with nutrients. You're growing your own nutrients for the garden, and you're generally growing perennial plants as well. It's productive, so you're growing mostly edible crops, but you can also grow timber, you can grow canes, you can grow hazel bits of wood, what they're called. You can grow all firewood, you can grow all manner of different things. And it's productive because it's also using all the available space. So you have a tree, basically you've got a tree, a shrub, and herbaceous perennials and ground cover. So you're using all the available space, and it's low maintenance. Absolutely essential that the majority of the work that you're doing once to get it established, the majority of work that you're doing is harvesting, and that's kind of harvesting, a bit of pruning, and the odd occasional piece of weeding, and that's it. And it's wildlife friendly because you're you're creating a forest garden with wildlife in mind, because you want to create an ecosystem. The whole point is to create something that looks after itself, and for that I am a really big proponent of using native plants where possible. Obviously not if you want to eat not if you want to eat a certain crop, but for the bulk of plants, and getting a diversity of native species in there, and that's always possible to do. So layers, very quickly, the quick way of looking at it is to have, you've got a canopy layer, a shrub layer, herbaceous perennials, and ground cover, so 3 layers, but in total there's actually 7 layers, and this is a kind of a handy little reference. So canopy, for example, a stone pine. Small tree, maybe like a medlar, which is on a semi-dwarfing rootstock, so like a small rootstocks. A shrub, for example, a lemonade bush, Rhus aromatica. Herbaceous means basically just means it dies back to herbaceous plant. There's no woody part to it at all. So when the plant dies, either dies back in the winter and comes back later, or if it's an evergreen, when it eventually dies, that means that it decomposes totally. Whereas something like a shrub has, like for example lavender, will actually have woody parts to it, which will kind of form a framework. Root, for example, a hopnis, which I think is actually a tuber. Ground cover, for example, good UK native ground cover is bugle, Juga reptans, and then a climber, for example, Caucasian spinach. Guidelines, there's throughout the entire process, I've broken it down into 3 different sections. So you have the planning, the planning, the structure, and the cultivate. But throughout the entire process, you're always paying attention to these kind of 3 guidelines, and that's spacing. One of the most important things is to not cram too many trees into your forest garden when you create it. You want to leave, on average, it's 1/4 to 1/2 of the average canopy diameter. So if you've got 2 4-meter diameter trees, you want to leave 1 to 2 meters in between. This will vary depending upon the height of the tree and whether you can take off the lower branches and if there's a slope, but that's a kind of good rule of thumb. Secondly, wind breaks. Get them in really, really early and protect your plants. It makes a massive difference to how well a plant will do. If you've got windbreaks established, I use dead hedges and then plant a living windbreak. your plants will do so much better. And then finally, native. I'm always thinking, is there a native species that I can use here instead of using a non-native species, whether that's in a windbreak or as a ground cover or as a boundary plant. So I'll come on to that again later. I like to think of forest gardening as intersectional gardening, so it's a kind of crossover between ornamental, edible and wildlife gardening. And it kind of sits in the middle, so it can be very formal. A forest garden, there's nothing to stop a forest garden from being a very formal garden with geometric shapes, and it's also a place with edible produce, and there is a massive crossover between ornamental plants and edible plants, and also between native plants and edible plants and useful plants as well. So let's go on to the 3 stages. First, plan. I really recommend spending a good amount of time doing this. It's like an awful lot of things in life. You do all that. The preparation is where the kind of the bulk of the work is. The actual creating it is work, but the preparation for that will shape the garden for years and years to come. So it's good to get that right. And as I said before, getting the trees in the right place is the most critical thing. Other plants you can shift around, you can move about the place, but trees, they grow big, they get heavy, they're a bit difficult. So when you're planning, give yourself, the rule of thumb is a year to observe and to design before planting anything really, if you have the luxury of that time. So you observe, you see what the conditions are on the site throughout the seasons, and then you start the design process. Next thing, when you have your kind of your plan in place, you want to put in the structure. So this is windbreak hedges, trees, paths, polytunnels, greenhouses, that kind of thing, ponds, and put the structure into place. Don't do what I did, which was I tried to do absolutely everything all at the same time. You can't do it. So better to put the structure in and then leave it as, well, in this situation I've left it as one field I have left as grass with trees growing in it, and making sure that the trees are mulched regularly, and they'll keep on growing. And when I get round to doing that particular set part of the garden, then I'll clear the ground, I'll put the shrubs and the perennials in and the ground cover. So do it section by section, rather than you can do it all in one go, and it depends upon your setup, but it's more expensive doing it that way because you need a vast number of plants and you've got a vast amount of soil to clear as well. So I kind of like to break it down: plan, first year, structure, get the plants, put the trees in the winter and the windbreaks and the paths and the ponds and the polytunnel, and then cultivate section by section, work on each section. Don't rush in, there's no need to rush into it. So plan. Oh yes, when you're planning, first off, buy this book. This is a very good book, a very good book. Martin Crawford's Creating a Forest Garden. I've bound it in black tape to make it look like I've read it an awful lot and know what I'm talking about. But yeah, there's a link there, you can buy it. Next thing, make a map of your property. I use, have I got any here? Yeah, I have 5mm square paper. Somewhere. Oh, crikey, it's underneath everything, isn't it? So this is the stuff that I use for doing for sketching stuff out. Probably can't see that, but it's 5mm square paper, and do it to scale as well. So if a lot of gardens are quite rectilinear, and they're relatively easy to do. Some are a bit more difficult to measure. But it doesn't actually matter. It could be a sketch. It doesn't have to be on grid paper. Just a sketch, and to see where you can put different trees basically and have ideas. Work out your scale. That's the most important thing. Now I do have I'm going to create a separate course for doing CAD design. So if you're doing more than one map and you really like forest gardening, or you really want to get into doing garden design, I'd recommend using CAD. But for most people, I'd say just stick with a piece of 5mm squared paper. But do draw it out, and don't worry if it looks like shit, because it doesn't matter. What really matters is that you get your ideas down and you get your trees in the right place. Yep, that's the important thing, not what it looks like. Okay, observations. So this is part of really, really important part of the planning process. And there is a downloadable checklist PDF for this, but you do need to do it. So position, which is your aspect, which direction you face, because the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and that determines how much light you get and what you grow. The plants are very kind of some plants are relatively sensitive to how much light they get. Some plants won't grow in shade, some plants must have full sun, other plants can grow in part shade, other plants must grow in full shade. So you need to know where the sun is, and if there's enough sun coming to where, what parts of the garden get how much sun. As part of that, as well as the elevation, how high up you are will alter your climate and make it a few degrees colder or a few degrees warmer, and the slope as well. So if you're on a slope, a south-facing slope, you get warmer temperatures. If you're on a north-facing slope, then you get considerably colder temperatures. So work all those out. Really good. There's an app called Sun Surveyor app, so that shows you where the sun is. And Sun Surveyor, I think it's sunsurveyor.com. I think, but yeah, there's a link in the notes. Elements, water. Is there running water or still water on the land? When it rains, where does the water flow? Where are the dry parts of what the dry parts of the land? Wind, where the wind comes from, what the direction, the default direction, the general direction of the wind. Kind of around here, it's north and east in the winter and southwest in the rest of the year. The sun, as I was saying before, work out where the sun is in the sky and how much sun your plot of land gets, and the soil, the earth. What type of soil do you have? Is it clay? Is it loam? Is it sandy? Is it silty? I think those are the four main types. And is it acid or is it alkaline? So yeah, just figure out what the underlying geology is of the area that you're in and how acid it is and what type of soil you have too, because that will really determine what you grow. And my general rule is go with what you've got. I'm not saying don't try different things, but go with what you've got. For example, I've got a bugle here. Bugle's supposed to like fairly rich soil, not fairly kind of fairly good soil, like well-drained soil. And we've got some growing out of a crack in full sun, and it shouldn't like it there at all, but it absolutely loves it and is doing very, very well. So do experiment, but generally try and put in things that like it, like the conditions that you've got. Features, existing habitat, existing plants. Existing plants are a very good guide as to your conditions. So if you've got a lot of creeping buttercup, or you've got a lot of nettles, or you've got a lot of dock, or you've got a lot of broadleaf plantain, all these plants will give clues as to what type of conditions you have, and then what type of plants will do well, and what kind of type of amendments that you need to do. How to improve your soil. Utilities. So gas, electricity, pylons. Don't plant trees on top of sewage pipes and electric pylons. Structures, existing structures, and the foundations for previous structures. Know that they're there. Either repurpose them or use them in some other way, but just make sure you know what's under the ground, because you can look at something, go, yeah, I know what's there, and then you start digging, and then you start to realise what the actual topography of the land is, how it's actually shaped, and then access, footpaths and the like. Situation, who your neighbours are, where the roads are, how much noise there is, and also yourself, what position you're in, how much money you've got, how many skills you've got, how much time you've got, how many children you've got has a great deal of an effect on how much time and money you have and energy. So yeah, there's a good checklist, handy checklist. You can go through that checklist. Now, wish list. They're kind of two main wish lists: features and plants. So for features, I always start with wildlife. That you're creating a feature first and foremost for wildlife, and generally people like them as well. But things like stone walls or ponds. Ponds is an absolute best thing, one of the best things that you can do, creating a pond. Any kind of water, boggy areas, moss beds, all sorts of different things. I could talk about it for hours, but I haven't got time. Seating, include the humans, and make the garden approachable, because you will want to go into the garden, and if you go into the garden, then you can sit down, then you will spend more time there, and if you sit down and spend more time there, then you will give the garden more attention, and if you give the garden more attention, then it will develop. Yeah, this is not, and it's attention not as in I'm going to do this, this and this. It's attention as in sitting down and being in that space and seeing what needs to be done rather than what you think ought to be done. And then structures, structures is always very good to have somewhere to sow seeds, like a potting shed. I'd love a brick potting shed one day. But polytunnels, greenhouses, glass houses, what do they call them? Cloches, all sorts of different things. Think about the structures, think about the ponds that you're creating, all that kind of stuff. Get all the ideas down, make a big long list of stuff that you'd like and like really must have, and that would be nice, but not that, not too fast. Plants, I've created a template spreadsheet, depends if you're into spreadsheets or not, there's a link here. Because I do a lot of different work for different designs, there's a lot of different plants, so I use a spreadsheet. But don't worry about it if you haven't. Plants for Future, fantastic online database, a whole lot of different plants. And then inspiration, I use Pinterest to collect pictures. Onto the design. So design really is about putting things purposefully in the right place. And where is the right place? That is $1 million question. Design on paper. So I just recommend if you're starting out, you're just doing one garden, design on paper, add your observations, add your wish lists. Circles for trees, make sure you get the right scale and the right spacing. So spacing, windbreaks, native. Okay, on to structure. So structure, this is the structure that you really want to be putting into place first of all before you do any other kind of planting. So windbreak, so a windbreak hedge. This is a Rosa rugosa, one of Martin Crawford's sites down in Devon. In the meantime, I'd say use a dead hedge. Dead hedge is simply a pile of sticks stuck between some posts. But they're bloody brilliant. They're a really good way of using up. I haven't had a bonfire since discovering the joy of dead hedges. I've never had a bonfire. I just kind of put all my old bramble and crap and everything onto dead hedges, and it provides protection for specific trees. And I've also got a big long woven dead hedge as well. And then I'm going to grow a windbreak hedge on the other side of that dead hedge. And a nursery does a similar thing as a dead hedge, but it's a living thing. I don't really use them that much actually. Scotch broom is a good nursery. Paths. So paths are great. Paths define areas, and they're absolutely essential part because you're guiding people through your garden, and it depends upon the different areas you've got. This is a rhubarb area here, and rhubarb and gooseberry, and that's the compost bays, and then this is up by the side of the polytunnel. And so a path will define the areas. Grass is good if you've got a large garden. Grass is great because it's cheap and it's hard wearing and it grows quickly, and that's also its downfall. It grows quickly, it will try and swamp everything else. I use barrier plants like a geranium, big root geranium, to stop grass from going into beds. Wood chip if it's a high volume area, and you can hoe wood chip to get rid of the weeds, or hard surface if it's a very high maintenance, very high traffic. This spot down here at the bottom has got really muddy this year. I must put hard surface in there because the grass isn't up to it. Perennial veg, I put perennial veg into the structural side of it. Perennial veg is because it takes a while to build up your stocks. It's relatively expensive to get started, so you want to start earlier on so that you can build up the number of veg that you've got before you start eating it. So very important. Paths, signage, kitchen, and attention. So paths around it. Make the beds small, like a metre across, and much better to have an intensive small bed that you can actually see and you can kind of look after than a massive, great big sprawling bed that you forget what's in it. Signage, let you know what's there, close to the kitchen, and give it your attention. Here's some links: Alison at Backyard Larder, Mandy at Incredible Vegetables, Stephen at Elementals, and Alan Carter at Food Forest Garden. All of them brilliant. Yeah, go and have a look. Canopy, yes, windbreaks. Make sure you get your windbreaks in first. Get your spacing sorted out, and choose the right rootstock. The rootstock determines the height and figure of a cultivated fruit tree, such as a cherry, plum, pear, apple, that kind of thing. And then do think about if you're pollinating partners, particularly for cultivated fruit like apples, etc. And then finally, cultivate. So area by area, cultivate area by area. And when you're starting off as well, you want to think about propagating and go for easy, native, ground cover and hedging. Ground cover's the big cost. It's kind of funny. You think it would be like the trees and the canopy layer, and actually the ground cover can get really expensive really quickly. So do think about, if you've got the space and the time and the ability, do think about propagating stuff earlier on. And timing, one area at a time for... So divide up your garden into different areas and then concentrate on cultivating one area at a time. And by cultivating, I mean you deturf, then you put down a mulch, then you a temporary bark mulch, and then you plant your shrubs and you plant your herbaceous perennials and you plant your ground cover, and then finish that first and then go on to the next bit. Don't try and do it all at once. That ground cover plants 3 to 4 plants per square meter, so even just like a 10 meter by 10 meter garden will take 400 ground cover plants. So you can see very quickly it gets very expensive. Deturfing, turfing iron for the smallest area, so it's like a modified spade. So if you've got a small area, turfing by that's a good way of doing it. Cardboard mulch for a small area like this in the photograph here. Make sure you weigh down the cardboard mulch. You can get cardboard mulch from kitchen appliance shops and bicycle shops. And then if it's a big space, then use a digger, mini digger or digger, and scrape it off. And then think about what you're going to do with the turf. And you just want to take off the very top layer of grass. If this is if you're deturfing, you don't want to take anything out, any of the other topsoil off. So the planting process is so you've chosen your area to work on. You deturf, whatever method. You put down a layer of bark mulch, then you plant your shrubs. You can see here, I don't know if you can see that, I've marked out where the diameter of the shrub will be. And then you plant your ground cover, 3 to 5 ground cover plants per square meter, and then you sow an annual temporary ground cover, and that just allows the permanent ground cover to get established and keeps down other kind of grass and weeds and stuff. So that's the planting process for each, and then you do that area by area until you've done the entire garden, and then you can put your feet up and relax. Oh yes. So break it down: plan, canopy, cultivate. And yeah, what do I need? Lots of energy, particularly at the beginning. It's always, yeah, if you can afford it, it's actually quite nice to get it all done in the first place. There's an initial hump, and then it gets much easier later on. So, and you can do it in any space as well. The forest garden can be in any space, but the main thing's time and attention, and money too. Here's a reference: Martin Crawford's book. I've made a spreadsheet of all the plants in Martin Crawford's book, Plants for Future website. RHS Plant Finder is kind of handy for plants that aren't in Plants for Future, and Orange Pippin is a nice little reference as well. Thank you very much for watching. I shall see you over in the Zoom meeting. Whoa, oh yes, great. Okay, I'll say goodbye there, and then I'll do a little edit. Pat, okay, I'm going to go over to Zoom. So Pat says, could you suggest plants that like shade under trees that produce biomass quickly? Flowering and fragrant would be a Brucey bonus. You've got to be that produce shade. I would be a little bit hesitant about producing biomass. Depends what you want the biomass for, really. The thing is, you want to get a plant that works well with the tree, and that won't compete. So if you've got something that's just generating a lot of biomass, kind of implies that it might be competing with it. Depends what you want the biomass for, I'd say. I'll be tempted to use another. Yeah, if you're after the actual mass, then something like willow is a kind of typical. Bowles willow is a typical biomass generator. Bowles willow. Come over here. No, it won't come over here. Bowles willow. Let me just type that again. That grows very, very quickly and very upright. It's not particularly competitive, but you wouldn't plant it under a tree because it grows to about 6 to 8 meters. So something like a comfrey, I would say comfrey is, in terms of the amount of growth that comfrey it'll get established, and it will kick up an awful lot of foliage. So I'd say comfrey is your best bet. And the nice thing about comfrey is, well, it's flowering and fragrant. Nice thing about comfrey is that it's got deep tap roots, so it's kind of perfectly suited for a tree. Trees kind of got the feeder roots on a tree go out, and a lot of them actually point upwards as well, whereas a comfrey goes straight down. And there's different types of comfrey that you can get. So there's Caucasian comfrey with lovely blue flowers, and then there's this comfrey here, which is Iberian comfrey with kind of apricot-y kind of colour flowers as well. Biomass is ready to prevent. Yes, no, it does. No, comfrey does handle shade as well. So Pat's just saying, will comfrey handle the shade? It actually likes part shade generally. I think you'll find it wild. I found it in glades and stuff. So part shade should be fine. So, and it will grow vigorously. Biomass is ready to prevent people accidentally kept down. Immature plants down by accident. Yep. Well, I don't know if you. Yeah. So it depends. Depends what you're planting, and if you're going to protect a plant. Yeah. But that's the kind of conversation. If you're going to Zoom, that'd be great. If not, send me an email, and I will. Yeah. I can always answer you. That's me. I'll put my email in the chat. Okay, I'm going to go over to Zoom now. So yeah. So hopefully that's kind of useful. There's a whole lot of other plants as well, Pat, that I haven't even thought about. I do have a spreadsheet of native wildflowers that with a kind of conditions and stuff. There's a whole load of different things that you can grow, which will grow in the shade and will grow in full shade and will flower. But I haven't really got time to do it right now. Okay, but do send me an email. Tell me what you're after, and I can send you some information. Right then, better pop over to Zoom. Thank you for watching.